Alice Grace by Margaret Atwood. A story told in shadow and light. She watched, she waited, she became.
You should know that I am a liar. Grace Marks is a maid, a prisoner, a mystery, accused of murder. But what really happened? She tells her story to Dr. Jordan, a man who wants to unlock her mind. Her tale is fragmented: a dead friend, a cruel mistress, a house full of secrets. Grace remembers and forgets. Is she innocent or dangerous? Alias Grace Asterisk is a story stitched together from memory, myth, and manipulation. In the end, we're left with a question: who owns the truth and who gets to tell it?
By Margaret Atwood. First theme is media and perception. Atwood explores how public perception is shaped by media, gossip, and storytelling in the 19th century, and by extension in every era. Grace Marks becomes a media spectacle. Newspapers, pamphlets, and public debates turn her into a symbol rather than a person. Competing narratives. Is she a murderess, victim, or a madwoman? Show how truth gets distorted by class, gender, and sensationalism. Dr. Simon Jordan, the journalist, and even Grace herself become narrators, shaping perception. The novel questions whether truth can never be separated from how it's told. The next theme is time and fragmentation. The novel's non-linear narrative mirrors the fragmented nature of memory and trauma. Gray's story is told through flashbacks, gaps, dreams, and shifting perspectives, emphasizing how time fractures under psychological stress. Atwood uses this fragmental form to reflect how women's histories are often interrupted, erased, or reconstructed by others. Simon's attempts to piece together Gray's memory reflect the Victorian obsession with order and rationality, yet Gray's fragmented narration resists that control. The next theme is feminine witnessing. This theme focuses on how women see, testify, and remember within systems that silence them. Grace's narrative is a kind of witnessing to injustice. Her testimony challenges patriarchal authority and social hierarchy. Other female figures, Nancy Montgomery, Mary Whitney, the women in prison, all offer alternative forms of witnessing: gossip, letters, ghostly presence, or silence. Atwood reclaims female storytelling as a model of survival and resistance, where witnessing becomes an ethical act rather than mere confession. The next and the final theme is passivity versus agency. Atwood explores how Grace Marks' apparent passivity conceals subtle forms of agency. Though she appears obedient and mild, the ideal Victorian woman, Grace uses silence, storytelling, and ambiguity to assert control over how others perceive her. Her restraint becomes a survival strategy in a world where women's defense is punished. Through this tension, Atwood questions whether Grace's calm behavior is genuine submission or a deliberate act of self-protection. By refusing to reveal the full truth about the murders, Grace maintains power over her own narrative, showing that agency can exist even within seemingly passivity.
And I am going to critically analyze narrative techniques. Firstly, I would like to begin with multiple perspectives. The story alternates between Dr. Jordan's observations and Gray's recollections, creating a layered narrative. This multiplicity highlights the gap between perception and the reality. Secondly, historical authenticity and fiction. Atwood uses real court documents, letters, and newspaper accounts interwoven with imaginative storytelling. This historical setting is used to reflect on the contemporary issues of gender, power, and justice. Thirdly, symbolism. Saving and domestic labor symbolize women's social constructs and roles. The motive of disease and illness reflects both physical vulnerability and societal corruption. The act of storytelling itself becomes a tool of survival and self-definition for Grace. To conclude with ambiguity and open ending, Atwood deliberately leaves the question of Grace's guilt unresolved. This forces readers to engage critically with the ideas of justice, truth, and narrative reliability. Thank you.
Indian Horse by Richard Wagamese. Skating between silence and survival. He played to remember, he played to forget.
I am not the Indian you had in mind. Saul Indian Horse begins his story in silence. Taken from his Ojibwe family, placed in a residential school, he learns early that survival means silence. But on the ice, Saul finds something else: speed, grace, escape. Hockey becomes his refuge, his rebellion. He rises, he dazzles, but the past follows. Beneath the cheers, the trauma waits. Saul drinks to forget, but memory is a stubborn thing. In the end, he must return, not to the rink, but to the truth. Indian Horse is not just a story about sport. It's about survival, about reclaiming voice, about skating through silence toward healing.
Memories.
First, the silence is one of the most powerful themes in Indian hearts. Saul and other indigenous children in the resident school aren't allowed to speak their native language or Ojibwe or express their culture. These forced silence represent cultural erasure, the attempt to destroy indigenous identity. Saul himself grows silent about his pain and trauma. He does not talk about the abuse he experiences at school. This silence became his way of surviving. He hides his feelings deep inside instead of confronting them. Silence also became a symbol of how Canada silenced indigenous voice for generations. Their sufferings, history, and spirituality were ignored. The next theme is the identity. The novel is a journey of self-discovery. At St. Jerome's School, Saul's indigenous identity is stripped away. The nuns and priests rename him, cut his hair, and punishes him for his culture. He is made to feel ashamed of being Ojibwe, search for identity, then later through hockey. Saul finds a temporary sense of belonging and purpose. The rink gives him a new identity, the gifted hockey player. But this too is fragile because others only value him for his talent, not for who he truly is. In the end, Saul returns to his ancestral land and family stories to rediscover his roots. He realizes that his true identity lies in his peoples, his land, and his memory, not in the approval of white society. Next, the theme of escapism. Escapism means trying to escape from pain and trauma, and it's central to Saul's life. Hockey has escapism. Hockey became Saul's way of escaping the horror of the residential school. On the ice, he feels free, weightless, and invisible, the only place he can truly be himself. Later, when racism and trauma overwhelm him, Saul turns to alcohol to numb his pain. This shows how trauma often leads survivors to self-destructive forms of escape. Eventually, Saul learns that true escapism isn't running away, isn't facing the past, healing through storytelling, and connecting to his community. The last theme is the memory. Memory drives the entire novel, which how Saul tells his story. At first, Saul suppresses his memory of abuse and loss. He buries them deep because remembering hurts too much. The story is told in a flashback, showing Saul slowly remembering and confronting what happened at St. Jerome's. Saul's memories also represent the collective drama of indigenous people in Canada. Their shared suffering and survival. Remembering became an act of resistance and healing. Memory, in the end, restored Saul's sense of identity and purpose.
We are also going to see about the critical analysis of Indian Horse by Richard Wagamese. Richard Wagamese's Indian Horse is not merely a coming-of-age story. It is a profound exploration of trauma, identity, and the resilience of indigenous spirit under colonial oppression. Through the life of Saul Indian Horse, Wagamese exposes the dehumanizing efforts of Canada's residential school system and the long-lasting wounds it inflicts on indigenous identity and cultural continuity. The novel functions as both a personal and collective testimony, blending narrative realism with spiritual symbolism. At its core, Indian Horse critiques the systematic violence of colonial assimilation. The residential school acts as a microcosm of cultural genocide, a space where indigenous children are stripped of language, faith, and familial bonds. Wagamese uses the motive of silence throughout the novel to illustrate the internalized trauma that follows Saul. The priests and nuns enforce silence as control, and later Saul's own silence becomes a symbol of suppressed pain. This muteness parallels the broader historical silencing of indigenous voices in Canada. The narrative itself becomes an act of resistance, reclaiming of voice through storytelling. Wagamese employs post-colonial and trauma narrative frameworks, showing how storytelling can serve as a healing tool. Saul's journey towards recovery depends on his ability to narrate his experience, to convert trauma into testimony. The treatment center while Saul tells his story becomes symbolic of confession, but unlike the Christian confessional mode imposed by colonizers, this is a spiritual cleansing through self-truth rooted in indigenous oral tradition. His narration reclaims agency, showing that survival is not just physical but also cultural and spiritual. The sport of hockey functions as both liberation and entrapment. Initially, the rink offers Saul an escape from the brutality of the residential school. It becomes a sacred space where he feels a sense of freedom and mastery. However, as Saul tries to play with white teams, racism infiltrates even the sanctuary sport. Like the colonial institutions, becomes another site of exclusion and humiliation. Wagner uses this contrast to reveal how colonialism infects even seemingly neutral spaces. Zoll eventually withdrawal from hockey mirrors his alienation from both white society and his own community, psychological exile born of cultural fragmentation.
To wrap up our presentation, I like to highlight the central ideas both the novel shares. The power of silence, memory, and storytelling shapes identity and resilience in the face of oppression. Zol's Indian horse and Grace Mark's Alice Grace are both silenced, one by colonialism and other by patriarchy. Yet, they find strength through their own stories. For Zol, storytelling becomes a way to heal and reconnect with his indigenous roots. For Grace, it became a quiet form of power, allowing her to control over others see her. In the end, both novels show that true freedom doesn't come from forgetting the past, but from comforting it and turning the pain into strength through memory and voice.